Okay, briefly one can say that psychology originated during the latter part, at the latter part of the 19th century. And it developed from two perspectives. In Europe, from a more philosophical perspective, Wundt and Titchener, and from the USA, more from a physiological perspective, James. But the main emphasis was, in any case, the need to get more information on actions, the way in which people act, and the way in which their minds reflect in their actions. So the importance of psychological functioning clearly relates to ways in which we can assess such behaviors and things. Now, Wundt, when he started with his assessment, he wanted to find out how does the mind work, and focusing on a more systematic approach. He wanted to determine discrete entities that he could put together to get a feel. Titchener, who studied under him, said yes, but it seems to be more not just discrete entities, but more specific ways in which they meld. But James said, no, what we need to do is to get to the consciousness of human behavior. And consciousness of human behavior is also influenced by the environment in which you function. So normally, or traditionally, or even recently, it has been said that assessment from a psychological perspective can be done from three aspects. The one is biological, the second is to call it psychological, and the third one is the environmental approach. The biological approach is more specifically interested in what happens in the mind. How do we recognize? How do we deal with different issues? How do we think? How do we perceive? What does the mind tell us? The psychological is more what do we do with what we have? How does it affect us as people in our character, in our personality, the way we act and react? But very important is the implications of the environment, because individuals are not islands. They are always in interaction with a variety of environments. And these levels of assessment we found particularly in the way in which the NIPR was established to start with, and how it developed over time. Professor Biesheuvel specifically focused from a more European approach, a more philosophical approach, but his focus was on identifying how individuals potentially, focused on wanting to identify individuals' potential, taking into account the environmental influences, particularly in a multicultural context. So he wanted to identify people who are illiterate, people who have little experience of Western thinking and so on. How can we identify their potential? So when the NIPR was established after the Second World War, where we were told that the NIPR would get money for the admin, but that the NIPR had to earn its own keep thereafter. It started with just a few departments, but specifically focused on the biological, and that was found in, for instance, the EEG department. Mundy Castle, Gordon Nelson, Bruce Murdoch. They did research as far as mind is concerned, measuring mind waves, for issues like determining of epilepsy, but also interesting work that was done in terms of deprivation, whether it's from a white or a black perspective. Workers in the old Naisna region who were living in a very isolated environment. To what extent does isolation negatively affect in the way in which they can act and react? They did extremely interesting work in terms of, for instance, decompression for women, pregnant women. They did work on twins. They did work on Kalahari Bushmen. they did work on a variety of aspects, but looking at how the mind worked. Also, fun part, because Mundy Castle was a character all on his own, they decided that they would like to know what happens when you use LSD. What happens in your mind? So volunteers were asked from the NRPR, would they like to be there and just take a little bit of LSD and have their waves taken, which they did. They never remembered what they did the next day. They also did research in terms of the use of alcohol, for which lots and lots of beer, both Banter beer and breweries beer, was brought in, and a great time was had by all while they were studying it. Another anecdote, Mundy Castle, that one of the people indicated to us is when they went into the Sterkfontein caves in Krugersdorp, and when they went down, Mundy Castle asked the guide to please put out the lantern so that they can experience isolation and darkness, which they did. And then when they wanted to put on the light, they didn't know where the switch was, nor where the matches were. So the research done there was of groundbreaking nature, but part of the NRPR's work was always this almost fun aspect to it. It was practical research, testing theoretical inputs, but in a fun way to get answers.